At this point in time, I'm going to let you know that we are recording this session, so please note that. And I'm going to now alert our folks on the tech side to begin recording. My name is Eric Burmeister, and I'm the very proud superintendent of Fremont Unified School District, and I'm so happy that you've joined us today. Joining me on screen right now are our Director of Accounting, Robert Pasquale, and our Director of Budget, James Arcala. They will be participating at different times in this session and participating virtually. We have members of our staff, members of our community, and members of our board. I'd like to welcome everybody here today and let you know that today's recording will be available on our balanced budget web page on our district website, should you want to view this later on or should you want to share it with anyone else. Today, we are here to discuss the budget balancing solutions for Fremont Unified School District's current structural deficit. Before we take time to engage in input, we are going to give you the opportunity to understand a little bit more about our budget before you provide input and ask your questions. It's important to note that our district received an official review letter from the Alameda County Office of Education on our adopted budget for the 24-25 school year. The county office is conditionally approving our budget. Conditional is not a good thing. It's not a terrible thing yet, but it's also not a good thing. It basically means that they have concerns about our district's fiscal health and that we have to take steps to address those issues. These issues are issues that we knew were coming, we planned for, and we are also planning to mitigate the impact of the situation. A conditional approval also means that FUSD must take further action to address the county's concerns on, first, our structural deficit and how it depletes our reserves by $26 to $27 million, and addressing positions funded by expiring one-time funds, such as the Measure I parcel tax, and also what impact our current labor negotiations will have on our budget once we are settled with all of our labor partners. Again, all of these situations were known, they were planned for, they were communicated to the public, but in light of increasing costs and decreasing revenues, we need to let the public know what our situation is, and we need to have a plan to go about managing it. Now, if we start at the state level to understand the situation, we want to emphasize that we, Fremont Unified School District, are not alone in this predicament. Districts across California are experiencing the same thing as we are due to the expiration of millions of dollars in COVID relief funding, declining or flat enrollment, and increasing costs for goods and services, as well as staffing. The difference between us and many other districts is that many districts reduced staff and expenditures in the previous year, 23-24. From San Francisco to San Diego to Sonoma, districts reduced staff to balance their budgets. Now, Fremont Unified was able to hold off for one more year because of our relatively healthy fund balance or reserves. However, those reserves or our fund balance is running out. And now we find ourselves at what some in the state are calling the fiscal cliff, and we must make thoughtful decisions about reductions similar to the other districts across the state. At this point in time, I'd like to introduce our Director of Budget, James Arcala, who's going to give you a little bit more information about how to understand the Fremont Unified Budget. James.
Thank you, Superintendent Burmeister. I just want to make sure, are we on slide 4?
Sorry, we are.
There we go. All right. So let's start our budget discussion by looking at the district's budget at a glance. So our general fund budget for the district is $515 million total, approximately. 65% of that total are unrestricted expenditures. Now, unrestricted funding includes flexible dollars that are used for day-to-day operations like teacher salaries, utilities, supplies, etc. Now, the other 35% of the budget includes restricted expenditures. Restricted funding refers to self-contained programs with specific purposes and defined constraints. Some examples include special education, Title I funding for low-income students, miscellaneous grants and donations, etc. Now, on top of the expenses that are reflected in this pie chart, we also have to account for contributions made from unrestricted funds to restricted programs. Traditionally, we make contributions when there's not enough money provided to us by the grantor to effectively run the program. The two restricted programs we contribute towards are number one, special education, and number two, routine restricted maintenance. The state and federal government notoriously do not provide enough funding to run our special ed programs. As a result, we're confronted with an unfunded mandate and must subsidize our special ed programs with unrestricted funding. The second restricted program we contributed towards is routine restricted maintenance. We're actually required by the state to contribute 3% of our total budget towards routine restricted maintenance in order to maintain our facilities. Next slide, please. Now here, we wanted to summarize the district's budget deficit conundrum at a high level. The top table shows that the district is currently spending more than we're bringing in. The first line shows that our revenues are between 405 million and 406 million per year. The second line shows that we're spending between 528 million and 433 million dollars per year. As a result, we're spending more than we're bringing in. This creates a structural deficit indicated on the third line in red. So our structural deficit in the current year is 23.1 million, and our deficit next year grows to 27.7 million. Consequently, we'll need to reduce our unrestricted budget by 27 million to eliminate deficit spending and balance the budget. Now, below that table I was just speaking about, we've listed all the restricted one-time funding that's coming to an end very soon, but also pays for staff. The total cost of these one-time funded positions is $8.1 million. We'll need to decide what to do with those positions when funding expires. Do we keep them and pay for them out of unrestricted funds? Do we pay for them out of another funding source? Or do we eliminate the positions or a mixture of all three options? So altogether, we have $35.1 million in reductions to figure out by January of 2025, which is when the board has to vote on budget solutions. Next slide, please. Here is a visual showing what our unrestricted ending balance or savings account looks like for this year and looking forward 2 additional years. We monitor our fiscal health in 3-year increments because that is how the county is required to review our financials. They must make sure we're able to meet our 3% reserve requirement in the current year and 2 subsequent years from now. Without making any reductions, we're going from 9.9% reserves in the current year to 4.5% reserves next year, and finally negative 2.7% in 26-27. That means we'll be insolvent in 3 years if 0 reductions are made. So it is imperative that we take action to balance our budget. Next slide, please. This is a visual representation of our structural deficit. As a reminder, deficit spending is caused when an organization is spending more money than they are bringing in. This graph shows FUSC's expenditures compared to our revenues. As you can see, expenditures in orange are outpacing revenues in blue. That gap between the lines is our deficit spending, which is being subsidized by our savings account. Our savings account can only be spent once, and each year the deficit is draining these reserves until the point of depletion in 26-27. This situation is due to declining enrollment over a 3-year period, which drives revenues lower, and combined with increasing costs from year to year. Some of these increasing costs include salaries and benefits, negotiated raises, pension costs, utilities, and rising contributions. Next slide, please. Here, we want to emphasize how 85% of our budget pays for staff, which are salaries and benefits. Out of our $338 million unrestricted budget, $298 million, or 85%, is paying for certificated and classified salaries and benefits. The remaining 39 million, or 15%, goes to supplies, services, and utilities. We will be reducing supplies, services, and utilities, but it won't be enough to balance our $27 million deficit. That 15% in non-salaries includes mandatory costs to keep our operations running, such as electricity, water, gas, waste disposal, classroom supplies, etc. We can cut some of it, but not all of it. We have no choice but to impact staffing in our reduction plans. Next slide, please. To further dive into the cost of staffing, this graph shows enrollment represented by that top yellow line that's sliding down. You can see that enrollment has been decreasing since 1920. We've actually lost 2,385 students since COVID. As a friendly reminder, enrollment ties directly into our revenues. So as enrollment declines, so should staffing theoretically. Now the bar chart represents staffing. For example, the blue bar represents certificated staff, who are mainly teachers. The orange bar represents classified staff, which include clerical positions, custodians, business staff, technology, etc. The gray is management, and the green are noon supervisors. We've made some adjustments to certificated teachers as classrooms collapsed with less students. However, classified management, classified management, and non-supervisors stayed relatively flat. As a reminder, people are 85% of our budget, so aligning staffing with enrollment can make a sizable difference. Next slide, please. Attrition is a strategy that FUSD will leverage to support our budget reduction plan. Attrition is when an employee departs the district due to various reasons such as retirement, resignations, etc. FUSD will prioritize moving individuals into new roles as opportunities arise to attrition in order to minimize layoffs. The next slide, please. We have the opportunity to make careful decisions around reductions based on what we prioritize as a district. See, we're in the driver's seat right now and can navigate our own path forward. However, that time is limited. We must approve of a budget reduction plan by January of 2025, or the county and state will do it for us. If the district goes insolvent, we'll be relegated to the back seat of the vehicle and cuts will be decided by the state without our approval. It's going to take commitment from everyone to get this done, and we look forward to working together to improve fiscal health of our school district. And now I'll pass it back to Superintendent Burmeister.
Thank you, Director Arcala. Now, if you are interested in diving deeper into the budget situation and decision-making plan, we encourage you to see the balanced budget for fiscal sustainability presentation that the district staff provided to the board at the September 18th special meeting. Feel free to scan the QR codes shown on the screen for either the recorded presentation or the slides. This will provide you a little bit more detail into the budget, but today's overview provides a really terrific summary. I also want to let you know that at next week's board meeting on Wednesday, October 23rd, our board will receive a mid-interim budget report. For those of you who aren't aware, every quarter or so, every school district staff is required to report to their board on an interim basis how the budget is moving forward based on what they budgeted in the summer. That usually occurs for the first interim in December. However, due to the big decisions that we need to make between now and January, our staff is going to be providing an additional mid-interim report at next week's board meeting. This will provide even greater insight into the budget since the school year has started, since we have fully accounted for enrollment for the school year, and since all staffing questions have pretty much shaken out for this year. In addition, it will include any changes to the reserve levels that we anticipate for the end of this school year, and it will provide even greater clarity for the board and for the public moving forward. So we encourage everybody who's interested in the detail to visit our meeting either in person or virtually, or to watch the recording next week. I also want to let you know that we have the rest of this month to encourage you to stay engaged and follow the discussion. On your screen right here, you can see that we are engaging in a series of town halls between now and October 31st. Now, that will not be the only time, but it is a really important time where the board and the staff are getting important feedback. And this event that you're attending right now is part of those calendar events. On October 31st, the budget input portal will shut down, and we will begin the process of planning scenarios. Those scenarios will be presented to the board in information only form at the November 20th board meeting. That will give the public and the board 2 weeks to review the material prior to the discussion of the board, and that will be the first discussion of the board on December 2nd, which will be a special board meeting. And then on December 18th, it says on your slide December 11th, but that's old. This past Wednesday, we just changed it to December 18th. Our regular board meeting will occur, which is going to give us an additional week to provide any opportunity that the board would like to get feedback from the community between December 2nd and December 18th, and have any further discussions prior to the decision-making deadline, which is January 8th. At the regular meeting on January 8th, the board will take action on what reductions to pursue to be able to meet our goal of reducing our budget upwards of $30 million. Next slide. Oh, sorry, the slide before. I want to turn your attention before we open up to questions, the balanced budget input portal on the district website, but you don't have to go there. You can get it straight from this QR code. We have a budget import portal that allows you, any member of the community, whether you're staff, a parent, a community member, a student, to provide feedback on the priorities that you see as most important and areas that you think we might be able to find some savings. This budget input portal is intended for you to generate ideas and to give us ideas, to bend our ear, to give us instruction in the areas that you would like us to pay attention to. Once we receive this information, we will be spending November packaging a series of scenarios that will be delivered to the board in information only on November 20th, and to begin discussion on December 2nd. And we hope you will continue to participate. At that time, the board may choose to reopen the balanced budget input portal for more specific input from the community. But for now, we have until October 31st for you to give your initial insights, ask us any questions that you may have that we can add to our frequently asked questions list, which is also on the portal, and to provide us any input you might want to provide. We want to recognize that periods of reduction are stressful, and nothing that we do in FUSD is without value. The work each of us does is valuable, and finding the supports what supports our current needs and work should be the minimum provided by the state and federal sources, but they're not. Unfortunately, California severely underfunds its schools, and our district is one of many in the state that needs to dramatically cut its spending to match its shrinking budget. So we really do hope that you will take the opportunity to provide your input on the balanced budget input portal. Next slide. But before you do that, we want to give you the opportunity to ask us questions. It's really important for you to understand the ins and outs of the budget, to ask us questions about maybe rumors that you've heard, to ask us questions of points of clarification, to ask us what considerations we're looking at, and we're happy to share those answers with you today. We certainly are open to your input as well in this venue, and so we will be taking notes to make sure that we get any and all suggestions that you provide us today. But we do want to remind you that we are taking input between now and October 31st to set up those initial suggestions to the board. And then November 20th, December 2nd, December 18th, and January 8th. All four of those board meetings provide you additional opportunities to speak directly to the staff and the board about your input and your considerations. And at this point in time, we would like to open it up to questions. You can ask a question by doing a couple of things. You can raise your hand, and somebody on the other side of the big Zoom wall will unmute you and tell you that you can ask your question, and we'll be happy to answer those. In addition, you can add your question to the comments section. And it looks like we don't have a comment section, so you'll have to raise your hand in order to ask a question. So with that, we will go ahead and pause and allow you guys the opportunity to consider what questions you might have, and then to raise your hand.
Alex Reyes, go ahead.
Superintendent Brewmeister, thank you for allowing me to be here today. First of all,
Absolutely.
I'm meeting you. One quick question I need to ask. If FUSD fails to, I don't know how to say this because this is my first time seeing this. If FUSD has failed to meet their contractual obligations with, and they get local control, does that mean layoffs across the board, or how does this work? I'm an employee, so I don't want to lose my job. So I want to make sure I understand this fully.
Absolutely. Well, I'll speak very high level, but then Director Pasquale or Director Arcala, if you have something that you wanted to add, you certainly can add it. Right now, we are not in a position to have somebody come in and say, either the county or the state come in and say, we're just going to do across the board cuts. However, that is something that could happen if we don't respond satisfactorily to the county's request that we make the necessary cuts in order to have a fully accepted budget, right? So right now we have a conditionally accepted budget, which basically means they're accepting our budget for this school year. They realize we have enough money for next school year, but we do not have enough money for the third school year out. And it is a requirement from the state of California that you do that. So some school districts have gotten in trouble because what they've done is they've just said, okay, well, we're not going to make the necessary cuts that we have to make in order to get those balanced budgets for 3 years out. And so what happens is you start getting stronger slaps on the wrist, so to speak. And if you don't solve your problem according to the guidelines of the county and the state, then what will happen is the state will take you over, and they will, and this has happened to school districts in our county. I'm going to not name names, but it is not unheard of that the financial decision making of a school district is taken away. The board and the staff no longer have the ability to make those decisions, and the state and the county unilaterally make the cuts as they see fit. Now, we have zero intention of allowing that to happen in Fremont. We are going to do what nearly every other school district in the state of California is doing right now or did last year. We are going to balance our budget, and we do expect that it is going to require some reduction in staff. It is our hope that even if we can't do it by the March 15th deadline, which is the state statute for when you have to give notice to employees, but even if we can't, have a place for everybody by March 15th, we do hope by the time the school year starts next year that anybody who was laid off has a place in the system through attrition. And so what that means is somebody moves out of their role due to retirement or resignation, and then we provide the opportunity for somebody who has been laid off or whose position has been cut to then apply for that role and be appointed into that role. So it is our hope that we will be able to take care of most positions that might be reduced through attrition. But we absolutely will need to be making cuts in staffing, and we will need to be making those decisions in January. So you would know if your category of position is part of the reductions. And then as most positions in a unionized workforce are, it would people's who is laid off would be based on seniority in each of those classifications. Mr. Pasquale or Mr. Alcala, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Nothing to add, sir. You're correct.
No, that's all. Yep, you got it all.
Okay,
All
we
right.
also have Deepika Priyadarshini.
Hello, thank you so
Hello.
much for sharing this information. One thing I realized as I was listening to this presentation was it was leading to resource action. And resource action, I understand, is always the last avenue. What I did not find, and I know you guys are asking us to be creative in terms of solutioning, I didn't had enough information to be creative. Like, I don't know what is the efficiency of FUSD versus compared to other school. What is, I know there is a fixed cost and a variable cost. What is that cost translates per student? What is our utilization level as compared to other school districts? So I feel like I'm working in a solution that is leading to it versus like entire picture in terms of being creative.
Absolutely. And we recognize that that is a challenge, particularly for parents and community members who maybe aren't as familiar with how schools are funded and how they're budgeted and where the resources are going. And so that's why we're sort of doing this in two steps. We're giving folks the opportunity to give input now as the staff is designing the sort of first draft or the straw dog, if you will, to use an expression. I don't know if that's an appropriate expression or not. I'll have to look where that comes from. I think it's okay, but basically creating a draft of potential solutions. And so those will come, the public form of those will come on November 20th. But we wanted to give everybody, right now, it's really an opportunity to educate the public and say, do you have any initial ideas? Once we get this information and we develop the scenarios, those will be given to the board, and then we will go back out again in sort of like an education and feedback phase, as if you will. So right now, I think what we're looking at is really like, from your vantage point, are there any areas that you see that are super valuable to you as a parent, to you, to your child as a student, that you really want to make sure we protect as much as possible? So for example, if class size is really important to you, share that information with us. Share the story about how class size matters to your child. If let's say nursing services have been particularly helpful for you and you want to really make sure that we protect nursing services, or clerical staff, or transportation, what are those areas that are really like high level importance to you? And then if there are areas where you've always thought, why are we spending so much money in blank? If I had to choose between this and this, I'd love for you to take a closer look in this area of the budget to see if there might be savings. Now, we don't expect you to be experts on the budget. Right now, we're just getting your initial sort of input and reaction, and we understand that you're somewhat limited in what you can say and share. After November 20th, however, there will be very clear indications in terms of the kinds of the scale of reduction in what specific areas the board might be considering. And then you can give very specific input about those reduction areas. Director Pasquale or Director Alcala, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Nothing for me.
Mr. Alcala?
Sorry, nothing to add.
Okay. I hope that helps. I hope that helps you. Another thing that you can do is that our budget documents are all on our budget website. So you could actually go to the first interim report, not the first interim, the budget report that we did for the beginning of the year. And you can also participate or listen in on October 23rd to hear about sort of like the mid-interim report. And that will give you a better idea. I can also let you know that a lot of these one-time costs, so these are the ones that aren't part of necessarily the structural deficit, but they are either expiring at the end of this year or the end of next year, include currently are funding positions like counselors, campus supervisors, instructional coaches. What am I missing, Mr. Alcala?
You said counselors, instructional coaches,
Campus supervisors.
we have intervent.
Oh, and library media technicians.
Mhm.
So those are the individuals that staff our libraries. And so particularly as it relates to LMTs and to campus supervisors, those positions are funded by Measure I, which is our parcel tax, which is expiring at the end of this school year. So that's funding that is absolutely going away at the end of this year. That doesn't mean those positions are going away, but if we don't reduce those positions in some form or fashion, whatever we don't reduce is then going to go into the general fund, which already is operating at a deficit. So it's just those things, it's just a matter of, really, I mean, nothing that we might cut is going to be easy. And so among all of these non-easy reductions, the question remains, are there things that are essential to you that you want to advocate for protecting? And are there any areas that maybe in your experience haven't been as impactful that you would like to let us know? Are there areas of the general budget that you feel like, hey, maybe we don't take as many field trips to be able to save, a certain, position category, to have as many counselors as we can have? Those are the kinds of things that we want to hear from the public about.
Oh, actually, I do want to add one more great resource. In our presentation today, Superintendent Burmeister, he was speaking on slide 12. Slide 12 has a QR code and links to our presentation in September. In September 18th, we actually did a more detailed version of our presentation today. So we kind of kept it at a very high level this time around. But if you want to take a deeper dive and look into the weeds of things, September 18th, we have the QR codes here. A lot of great details there, comparisons between school districts there. So there's a lot of good information to chew on. And I'm also a resource as well. If you have any questions, you could always contact James Arcala, Director of Budget as well.
Okay,
Terrific.
we
Thank you so
have,
much.
oh, sorry. We have David Wilson next. David, go ahead. Nothing's coming through, David. Make sure that you are unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, awesome. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So just a couple of questions and possible, I guess, Band-Aids to kind of help. What would be would it be possible for the school district to, instead of laying off, do a hiring freeze and then recognize the vacant positions budgets and maybe utilize those budgets in other areas? Another option would be, or at least from what I've heard in the past when Rais Abbasi was the director of budgeting, I know they used unspent LCAP funds to kind of supplement the general fund when there was a budget deficit then. And I would also like to hear if there's any plans to maybe even sell some of the vacant properties that FUSD currently holds. And that's all I have for you.
Those are great questions, and I really appreciate you bringing them up. So, and if I misspeak or misunderstand any of them, please let me know. So, regarding the hiring freeze, it's a great suggestion, and it's so great. In fact, we've already started doing that. The thing that's important to note about, and I don't know if you're a staff member or a community member. If you are a staff member, and it sounds like you kind of have a sense about school budgets, then you're probably aware of this. But if I'm going to answer this for people who might not be, the school labor force is very cyclical, and it sort of begins and ends in a very cyclical fashion. And so you really don't realize much attrition during the school year. There is some, and where we've experienced it, we have frozen. So I really appreciate that suggestion, but we're really not going to realize a good portion of that until closer to the end of the school year when people announce their retirements and resignations. So it's unlike the private sector where resignations and retirements happen year round. So the answer is yes, we're doing that, but we can't realize much savings because our hiring and retirement and resignation cycle is very concentrated into one part of the year, and we are not in that part of the year. So yes, we are. Yes, we have, and yes, we will continue to do that. And any savings that we get from freezing this year will move forward in helping to reduce the amount of money that we have to cut in the spring for next year. So we are really looking forward to first interim and second interim budgets just to track how much we're actually saving. And I think it's not going to be insignificant. I mean, it's not going to certainly make up for the $27 to $30 million that we have to reduce, but it is going to be, I think, noticeable. The other one is unspent LCAP to supplement. So it's a really great suggestion. So for those of you who aren't familiar with school budgets and how it works, one of our, if you remember what Mr. Arcala was saying in the beginning of the presentation about restricted versus unrestricted funds, our unrestricted budget is where we have to cut. Our restricted budget, we don't have to cut because it's like you spend what money you have and that's all you get, right? And it has to be used for very specific purposes. So LCAP, which stands for Local Control Accountability Plan, is money from the state specifically to address certain needs as defined by the county, the state, and the school district's LCAP plan. And so we can not supplement because LCAP funds are not supposed to supplement core program. That's a big stipulation. However, in the past, there was a lot more flexibility with LCAP funds than there is today. And so what we might have done 3 or 4 years ago when there was flexibility, or even 6 years ago when LCAP really first came on the scene, there's a lot more regulation around when and how LCAP funds can be spent. Now, having said that, not necessarily specific to LCAP funds, but specific to restricted funds as a whole, one of the things that we're doing right now and will continue to do in November is to look at where in our budget are there either materials and supplies or staffing that are currently being funded by the general fund that could be redefined as restricted funds. And so those are absolutely proposals that we are going to bring forward to the board on November 20th and December 2nd for their consideration. Now, remember, restricted funds come with a lot of strings and a lot of regulations, so it's probably not going to be a lot of money, but we do believe that we could get several $100,000 across all restricted funds by moving them from a current general fund allocation to a restricted fund allocation. So do be on the lookout for that, even if it's not LCAP specifically, because again, LCAP now comes with a lot more rules. And then the last one was selling vacant property. So the school district does have a handful, not very many at all, of vacant properties. And one of them has already been sold, but we are in negotiations, and we are we haven't realized the revenue yet. And so we have a buyer and we're working on, all of the behind the scenes stuff. But until they are able to get all of the um, uh, permitting from the city, which takes a really long time because they're changing it from they're not wanting to build a school, they're wanting to build housing. Until that happens, we won't realize any of the revenues. And it's important to remember that those revenues will be one time, and relative to our big budget, it is not much money. It could maybe cover our parcel tax for the loss of our parcel tax for maybe 2 years. But we won't realize all of that money all at once. The board has not decided how that money is going to be spent, and there are restrictions on how that money can be spent related specifically to facilities. And so it's not necessarily going to be a lot of money, and it's not necessarily going to be able to be used for the things that we would want them to be used for. But when it does finally come to fruition, I guess in theory, it's possible that it could pay for things that the general budget is scheduled to pay for, and then we could use whatever savings we had for that to, move towards staffing or other things that we might otherwise cut. But again, one-time funds, not a lot of money, and we don't know when we'll actually realize it. So I think I answered those three things. Director Pasquale, you look like you had something you wanted to say.
Actually, sir, you said it all, everything, sir.
Okay, Dr. Alcala, or Dr. Alcala, Mr. Alcala, do you have anything you wanted to share?
The only thing I'd like to share is for first interim in December, that's going to be a really clearer version of our budget. As Superintendent Burmeister was speaking about, that's the time where we could start to budget vacancy savings. The thing is, we do a lot of hiring in July, August, and September. So October is a time where we could really start looking at, okay, these vacancies we have left for the year, more than likely they're going to stay vacant, or a majority of them will stay vacant for the rest of the year. So that's when we're going to be able to calculate how much vacancy savings we have for the year, and we'll budget that in at first interim. So stay tuned. You'll learn more about that actually at our next week board meeting. We'll do a sneak preview of first interim, and then we'll finalize the numbers in December at our official first interim presentation.
Although, all things being equal, it'll probably just, equal out in the wash. We do hope that there's a possibility that come at the interim the first interim, that some of those savings that we'll be able to see them, like all these little small efforts that we've been doing this year already, that we'll be able to see some savings, and maybe that number will go down from 27 to 25 million or something like that. We have some good things, and then we have some added expenses that we weren't anticipating, right? And so it's just, it's really a wait and see, and December we'll have more clarity, but we will give you a preview at next week's board meeting. All right, next question, Patty.
I did see a hand earlier, but I think they lowered and I'm not seeing any other hands.
Okay.
Oh, here we go. Nihar Jaju, go ahead.
Hi, hopefully you can hear me. Just a quick question. Where do things like, I know pre-pandemic, we didn't used to fund things like school lunches unless you were in a particular, income bracket, etc. Is that something that we can consider, or is that something that comes out of unrestricted or restricted funds?
Excellent question.
Because that would be a saving of a thought that you could take, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So school lunches actually is a cost that the state has taken on. And in reality, we actually, our food service program is a net positive program since the state has taken on these costs. So what that means is the reimbursement costs are actually paying for all of our staffing, which is one of the reasons why we're building a central kitchen. If our bond measure passes and it's part of the long range facilities plan, because this is a net positive program and it's paying for itself. So any revenue that we get, that's basically funding from the state that we get from the state, must be used on food service and food service alone. And it's intended to pay for all of the staff and all of the materials, the food costs related to, including equipment, and transportation of the food from the central kitchens to all of the school sites. So it is a restricted fund. It is self-funding, and we can't cut it, and we wouldn't cut it because it's self-funding.
I had a second question, if there's anyone
Absolutely.
else. The other one was around, some of the measures that are currently in the plan for balanced budget around the LMTs, right? The librarian technicians, etc., as well as the counselors, etc. Has there been an assessment of what the impact is on student care and literacy rates and things like that? Because I would imagine, particularly with a district like ours, where we do have a lot of people that the English is not their first language, right? So a lot of English language learners, etc. I imagine that would be a huge impact on them. And would that be something that we would then be expecting things like PTAs to pick up the costs for some of these things?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. What I can say is it's very on your broader question of, do we have the ability to show causality between these positions and students' reading levels, or these positions and a decrease in mental health calls or whatever. What I can tell you is, since COVID, across the state, reading scores and outcome scores on language arts have gone down, and mental health needs, suicide ideation, self-harm, conflict, the need for conflict resolution, all of that has increased dramatically. So it's difficult in education research, it is difficult to show true causation. But in my own experience, what I can say is the needs have dramatically increased post-COVID, because we had maybe not the same counseling resources, but we had the same librarian resources prior to COVID, when our scores were really good. And post-COVID, we've inched back. I mean, we've inched forward, but we haven't gotten back to where we were prior to COVID. I would say anecdotally, correlationally, we can say that it is very, very hard to make an impact on literacy and mental well-being without those positions. I can also tell you that we are not, the board, nobody is saying that we're cutting these positions. We're just saying that the funding specifically for these roles is drying up. Measure I is drying up at the end of this year. The funding for not all of counseling, but some of counseling, particularly the counseling that got us full-time counselors at all of the elementary schools, where we used to have half-time counselors, is expiring next year. And so I believe that the board has an interest, and I want you to know that the staff has an interest in valuing these positions and trying to find a way to keep them as best as we can until we can go out for another parcel tax. There needs to be a longer term solution. Right now, we are going to do everything in our power to try to find a stopgap, a band-aid, to try to get us to keep us with as much resource as we possibly can, at least for the next 2 years, between now and the next general election, to then go back out to the community and try to get either a renewal or an increase on our current parcel tax. Now, you may be asking, well, why aren't we doing this now? And the reason is, quite frankly, we also have facilities that are falling apart. And the board made the decision, and I think it was the right decision, that we move forward with a bond and our long-range facilities plan. And there's a lot of reasons for why the time is now. One perfect example is what happened at Irvington 2 weeks ago, when it was really, really hot, and the very old transformer overheated and almost caught fire because it's just so old and it can't hold all of this demand that the air conditioning was putting on it. That's just one example, right? Our facilities need repair and they need repair now. And so, unfortunately, the board had to make a Sophie's choice because it is very difficult to go out for two items on a ballot, a parcel tax and a bond at the same time. Very few districts have done that. Some have tried, and more often than not, they have failed. And so our hope is that we'll be able to eke by as much as we can for the next 2 years in order to gear up for another election in maybe 2 years, because you can only go out for parcel tax and bonds on primary and general elections. So on the off years, it's not really possible. There are some exceptions to that, but not very many. And if you do, it's very expensive because you have to pay for the whole election. So our hope is to try to find a way to get us by, and this is part of our way to get us by, right? Spend down our reserves, try to make some reductions, move some of those retiring one-time costs into the general fund budget, get through the next year to 2 years, and then hopefully pass a parcel tax that will bring us closer to whole in the not near future, but not too distant future. So again, it's not ideal, but unfortunately it is what it is. I will also just say, not that you asked, but I'm going to be working really closely with our Fremont Education Foundation board to talk about how they could be potentially an even bigger player in increasing philanthropic dollars to the district to try to close some of this gap. Right now, for a district our size to have a foundation that only raises between $100,000 and $200,000 a year, there's a ton of unrealized potential there. And it's going to be a lot of work and it's going to require a lot of volunteers in our community to say it matters and I'm stepping up and I want to participate and help. But I do see that not as an immediate solution, but as another opportunity to consider potential revenue streams that we haven't really tapped into.
Okay, we have Bobby Perry.
Hello. Thanks for having this. I really appreciate it. It's great to have this feedback directly with you and the staff. I'm curious. It is my understanding that as a district, we pay almost $1 million for our SRO program. And while I do absolutely think that the SRO program is beneficial, in times like this, when we are one of the only school districts that pay anything for in the county for our SRO program, the fact that we pay $1 million for the SRO program, have we had any conversations with the city about maybe them allowing maybe the next couple years until, like you say, we squeak by, having to go out for another parcel tax? Because I'd certainly, and please don't take this wrong, because again, I do support the SRO program, but I more support the LMTs and the counselors that the parcel tax fund. And so I'm just curious, what kind of conversations have been had with the city? I do know that the city is also under a budget, has budget issues, but I also know that their budget savings in the police department because of positions that they haven't been able to fill. And I'm just wondering if there's a possibility that for the next year or two, we can suspend that payment to the city so that we can both retain our SRO program as well as retain our libraries and our campus supervisors and our counseling. Because, if you ask me, I will always choose our campus supervisors and our LMTs over the SROs. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that question and comment. And your comment is duly noted. And I do encourage you to fill out, not that we haven't noted this here, but I also encourage you to fill out the individual budget input portal. Fill out a document, and that's the exact kind of sort of like Sophie's choice feedback that we would like you to share, right? It's important for our board and our staff to know that that you support all of these programs, but if you had to choose between one and the other or one and a few, you would choose certain ones over the other. And that's the kind of feedback that our board and our staff need to hear. What I can tell you is that one, we have a really good, productive, and positive relationship with the city, and I'm super grateful for that. We have begun to have the conversation about the cost, the line item of SROs. We are sensitive to the fact that most municipalities, most public agencies are having very similar challenges. And so we don't believe that there is a we don't believe that just getting, just having this conversation means they're going to have the money and they're going to say yes and it's all going to happen and it's going to be easy. But what I want you to hear me say is if there are ways for us, and we are pursuing the conversation with the city to try to help reduce the budget impact of the SRO program, we would love to entertain that, and we are engaging in that conversation. I will also let you know that we support the SROs and they are an invaluable resource to us. We don't believe that this should, and hope it doesn't become a zero-sum game conversation that we have to choose between librarians and SROs, because reading and libraries is just as important as student safety, and we want to be able to say yes to all things. Our hope is that we will be able to be creative on all sides. And I love your suggestion about maybe it's not even permanent, maybe it's just temporary. And are there ways that we can do that? And so I thank you for that spirit of creativity. I want to let you know we are having conversations with the city, and those conversations are more staff to staff, which is why they haven't necessarily been in, all board and all staff, because we're sort of teeing up the conversation with staff to staff conversations first. And then the board, we will provide to the board, when we do all of the scenario planning, we would provide a scenario that says, the city pays for all of the SROs, or the district just gets rid of the program, or we do a 20% reduction, or we do a 2-year, can you cover it for 2 years, which I love adding that into the scenario planning. All of those can be put on the scenarios that we present on November 20th, or not present, that we provide on November 20th, and then start discussing them on December 2nd. And then at that point, they're part of the public discourse, and people at the city, people at the school district, individual constituents can begin having a conversation about what they think and how that looks and how they would prioritize those scenarios.
And I appreciate that. I just want to follow up with, I did submit my comment and I went a step further, and I also wrote to the city manager and I wrote to the chief of police, just so that I could cover all my bases, because I felt like it gave them an opportunity to help us in our time of need, right? To be a true partner. And again, I realized they have their own issues, but having heard what I heard at a city council meeting with them being so far under budget in terms of staffing, I thought it gave them an excellent opportunity to help us out temporarily. So I have done that, and then, like I said, some other things. So thank you very much.
Yes, and thank you, and anybody else on the call, whenever you advocate for the needs of the school district, our hearts beat a little faster. So in all those places where you have the opportunity to say, remember our kids, remember our school district, remember our hardworking teachers and staff. We are grateful, and we appreciate you reminding everybody that Fremont education is everybody's business, even when you don't have kids in our schools. If you are a taxpayer, if you're a community member, if you're an elected, even if it's not for the school district, you have an investment and you benefit from great schools, and we appreciate you advocating for our needs. So thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Ashley H.
Hey, thank you for
Hi.
taking my question. So I really appreciate all you guys taking the time to inform us via these sessions. And I would echo sort of what one of the earlier speakers said, that it's hard to give comments just yet without having, more information. Like, I'm passionately in support of the counselors, but until I started talking to some teachers and staff, I wasn't aware of the role of like instructional coaches. So, without knowing exactly everything that's on the table, it's a little hard to know how to give an informed, comment just yet. But
Totally understand.
my question though is about Measure M. So what I know that you spoke to, that we have a mandatory 3% that we need to spend on maintenance and all that. But can you speak to sort of what the scenarios would be if yes or no, if it were to pass? What
Sure.
effect that would have on the budget?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking, Ashley. And I'm just gonna put it out there for everybody. It is inappropriate for me and illegal for me to advocate one way or another for anything that's on the ballot. So I'm gonna be careful in how I answer this question. And I just want everybody to know I'm not trying to be coy. I just want to be very respectful of the line. And as a school district employee on school district time, using school district resources, being this Zoom, I do not want to engage in advocacy. So just factually, what I want to let everybody know in answering Ashley's question is that our school district approved earlier this fall our school district approved it's like a 800 page or something crazy long range facilities plan. And that long range facilities plan has $2.6 billion in facility repairment needs. That is $2.6 billion in current dollars. Okay. Now we don't have any capacity to pay $2.6 billion. Our 3% routine maintenance is a few million dollars. Robert, do you know how much the routine restricted is at 3%?
I can find that out, sir.
It's probably, I'm going to guess, around 9 million. James, do you know?
I'll get the number as well. I want to get it precise.
Okay. So, we're talking, let's just say for argument, it's $10 million, right? That in and of itself, like when you think about the age of our buildings and all the repairs that need to happen, new roofs, painting, safety issues, heating and air conditioner from 20 years ago goes out, and you need a new motor when it's 103 degrees outside. All of those costs they add up really quickly. So our routine restricted maintenance is really just dedicated to those small emergencies that add up pretty quickly. In addition to that, we have about $50 million left in Measure E, which was our original bond, or our most recent bond. And that right now is dedicated to sort of the beginning first, very high priority items on the $2.6 billion list. So think about that, $50 million, 2.6 billion in need. So what the board did is this summer, they made a decision to go out for a bond, and that general obligation bond, the amount of bonding capacity. And so based on our property tax value and so forth, you can basically figure out how much capacity your school district or your entity has to go out to the electorate and ask them to help you basically take out loans to meet your $2.6 billion facility needs. So you got start with 2.6 billion. The first $50 million is just going to take care of like maybe a school's roof that is falling apart. Maybe we have to do the Irvington transformer that is 60 years old, and literally we had to cancel school for a day, and everybody has to do independent study in order to, you know, make up that time. Those are the kinds of levels of things that we would be able to pay for with or without the current bond measure that's on the bond. But we would not be able to make any steps to start doing the $2.6 billion of improvement. And as it is, the bond measure that's currently on the ballot would only give us the ability to address about the first billion. And so that sort of gives you an idea. If Measure M passes, then we have the funding to do a whole number of really urgent and important needs, particularly at all of the high schools, which every student in Fremont will touch at one point in time. And then some of the most dire needs at the elementary schools. And then there's still a whole bunch of other items that we're going to need to address, but those are going to need to be, you know, down the road and so forth. So the bottom line is we have $2.6 billion in need, and if we don't get any funding anytime soon, we'll only have about $50 million in one-time funds and ongoing. Robert, what's the amount?
14.8 million, sir.
And ongoing about $14 million. So, and a district of 41 schools, with our schools the age that they are, that 14 million is not going to go far. It literally just allows us to maintain the, you know, 60, 70-year-old buildings that we currently have.
Okay, we have one more question. Michelle Blake.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. I have a couple actually. And it ties into what you were saying. If that bond fails, what do you do? I mean, if things are crumbling and things are starting to implode and light themselves on fire, are you considering shutting sites down as a cost-saving measure? And then that also plays into the deficit, right? Is that a consideration for cost-saving measures?
It's a great question. So let me take that question, and then if you have others, you can ask, because this is sort of a two-part question. So one of the things that we want to let you know is we are not, at this point in time, the board has not given me any indication that they are considering closing schools as a cost-saving measure, not even to do with facilities, just related to our budget. However, on November 20th, we will be moving, one of the things we will present is a slide about, if you closed one elementary school, what might that save you? It's just because we're going to be doing all kinds of scenarios, right? And so, I'm just letting you know that will come up in discussion, but not because we're considering closing schools. It's just because scenario planning being what scenario planning is, you kind of have to put everything on the table, right?
Exactly. Yes.
But related to the facilities question, I could envision, and I'm not saying it would happen, but we do have some elementary schools where I'm not sure how many more years we have left, sort of like running them as they are. And so it certainly would not be out of the question that our oldest, most dilapidated school may need to be closed down, simply because we don't have the money to get it up to the level of health and safety standard that we may need it. Now, we are not in that position right now, but there are some schools, and I'm not going to name names, there are some schools that I visited where if we needed, like if that roof fell in, I have no idea what we would do. And so closing it could be an option. So again, this is like distant case scenario planning, but it's not, definitely not unheard of if we don't get some facility monies to sort of address our overall facilities needs. A perfect example is We're talking millions of dollars to repair Irvington just for what happened 2 weeks ago. I went and I visited the site. I mean, like this transformer could be put in an antique store and somebody would buy it. I mean, it is old, right?
Right.
And so, and Irvington isn't the only place that's like that. And so it is highly possible that we would get to a place where, let's say, a whole wing of a school, the HVAC went out, and we could literally consider the fact we can't put kids back in, because in order to replace and repair it, it could be millions of dollars, because let's say all the ducting is under concrete or all the electrical is under concrete. So there's all this, there's so many if-then scenarios that we have to take into consideration. So the answer is yes, it's a distant scenario, but it is a scenario that we would need to plan for. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about, okay, so what if Measure M doesn't pass? What happens when all of these facilities issues start piling up? And the simple answer is we have to start going more into our general operating budget, which means we have to cut more of class size, more staffing, more of the stuff that we're trying to save right now as much as we can, simply because at the end of the day, if our facilities don't have the health and safety standards that they need, then the only place you can go is the general operating budget. Now, we could maybe take out some loans, but then paying off that debt would be out of the general operating budget. And so it's sort of like you're just robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're paying for it now, but you're going to pay for it even more later. Robert, do you want to sort of talk about like all of the sort of domino effects of not being able, don't talk about the bond, but what happens if we can't address our most urgent facility needs?
Just like you said, sir, we have to go through our general fund unrestricted, or find another kind of funds that can be used for capital outlay or restricted repair and maintenance.
All right, you said you had some other questions. What other questions do you have?
I am so sorry, as I believe that I may have removed your speaking privileges. If you can please raise your hand so I can find you once more.
Sorry about that.
There she goes. Okay. Go ahead, Michelle.
Okay, no problem. Yes, so the other question I had goes back to the planning purposes, and you're talking about attrition versus layoffs. Has there been any conversation about surveying staff now to get an idea of how many teachers, other staff are contemplating retirement at the end of this school year versus waiting until later in the year to have that conversation with them?
Yes, so that's a really great question, and the answer is yes. We've already, shared with our bargaining partners, and we'll share more broadly as we get closer to the time, because literally right now teachers are just taking a breath from starting the school year, and we don't want to push anybody out, but we will begin having more serious conversations about the benefits of what we call early notification. We are going to also be considering some early notification incentives. And so there's this thing, and if we have any staff members on the call, or anybody watching later on, I'll just address it. Early notification is different from something that's known as a golden handshake, which probably happens in the private sector too, but I've never really worked in the private sector, so I don't really know if it is a thing. But in the public sector, a golden handshake means that basically school districts start paying for years of service, or giving people like cash incentives to retire early. That's usually a net loss for school districts now, and there's a bunch of reasons why it is. It used to be about 20 years ago that there were some scenarios where you could actually save money doing that, basically by getting your top salaried people to retire, and then bringing in really early young teachers and staff that have lower salaries. The problem is that because it's so hard to hire, recruit, hire, and retain educators these days, that most districts, including Fremont, have gone to a year to year for service credit. So there really isn't a savings benefit, because very experienced teachers will just go where the highest salary is, and so you don't realize the same savings. Plus, it's very expensive to do a golden handshake, and so we are not talking about a golden handshake, but we are considering, and we haven't made any decisions, of doing some kind of a small incentive for early notification. And basically what that means is a small amount of money, not anything that would get anybody to retire. Like, it's not like, ooh, if I retire now, I can get all this more money, but it's just, a token of our appreciation to say, hey, if you tell us between now and this date and this date, and we can get your letter of resignation or retirement to the board before we have to do layoffs, then maybe there's, an incentive. But we have to negotiate this with our partners, and we have to get board approval, and we have to see whether or not we have the money to actually do that. Now, granted, it's one-time money, but it may be money that helps us take care of our people and their hearts, because nobody likes to get a pink slip. So we just have to weigh the pros and cons, but that is the most that we would be able to do, is some sort of like early incentive, early notification incentive. We are not considering, nor is it financially feasible to consider what is known or has been known in the past as a golden handshake.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
All right, I think that concludes questions from our audience.
Terrific. Well, that's great, because we had planned for an hour and 15 minutes, and it looks like we have landed there. Patty, if you can bring up that last slide after the one that says questions. As she's pulling it up, I just want to remind you all that this is the first of, actually, can you go to the very last slide? Oh, is that the last slide? Sorry, no, this is right. You're right. This is the last slide. Thank you. If you didn't get your fill here on the Zoom, you can watch it again. We should have it posted by tomorrow morning. But also we have 3 in-person events, actually 4 in-person events coming up this week. And you can find out more about those events at fremontunified.org/calendar. And those events are tomorrow. And so tomorrow's Wednesday. So Wednesday and Thursday evening, we have one in the north, one in the south. We also have a special student event hosted by our Surfboard E, and that is tomorrow at 4:30 at the district office. We invite all students of any ages to come learn more and provide their input. And then we have another in-person one for those of you who like during the daytime when your kids are at school, and you don't need to worry about childcare. We have another one at the end of the week at our Fremont Adult School, and I believe that's at 10 or 10:30. But all of those dates and
10 a.m.
locations are 10 a.m. Thank you. All of those dates and locations are on our calendar at the district website. In addition, I want to remind you that on November 20th, December 2nd, December 18th, and January 8th board meetings, we will be discussing budget, and you will have the opportunity to provide input and get education and hot off the press information. And last but not least, I want to encourage you to take a picture of that QR code and to please give us your input, your insight. You can go back to it if you learn new information. That initial input portal will be open until October 31st. Then we're going to go work on the numbers based on your input and based on all these conversations we're having. We'll present the initial scenarios to the board for information purposes only on November 20th. They will not have made any decisions. They're not even going to really discuss it. They're just going to look at all of the cost items that we've put. And then people can start looking at them and have more sort of educated idea of what things cost, where we might be able to find savings, how you might prioritize that. And then we'll have opportunities on December 2nd, December 18th, January 8th, to have conversations before the board makes a decision on January 8th. And again, I just want to remind you that the purple square on this slide that says December 11th, I'll take ownership for that. The board last week moved their meeting to December 18th. It had nothing to do with the budget. It had everything to do with that we're seating a new board member after the election, and the new state law says we can't do it until a certain number of days after the 1st of December. And so we have to move our meeting to December 18th because of that rule. So this December 11th meeting is moved to December 18th. So I just want to highlight that for everybody, and we'll make sure that we get this slide corrected. So we hope to see you. We hope to hear from you in person or in the input portal. We want you to get engaged, and we want to remind you, we know that cuts bring up a lot of emotion for people. We're really trying to do this thoughtfully. We're really holding space for people's angst and fear in this. We know it's an uncomfortable situation. We are also uncomfortable, but we can do this together. We're going to try to do it with a scalpel. We're going to be as creative as possible. The alternative to doing it with a scalpel is doing it with an axe, and we do not want to do that. So we're going to take every $20,000 savings, every $100,000 savings we can, and hopefully those will add up to something around $27 million to $30 million. We hope that we can eke out some of these reductions over the course of 2 years, such that we can get to a new parcel tax election, and really save valuable programs. But we are going to need to make some cuts. They're not going to be easy, but together we can get through this time. And my hope is in 2 years, we'll be in a much better situation than we are right now. We thank you for your time. I want to thank Director Pasquale and Director Arcala for being with me and pitch hitting for any of those budget questions that I don't know the answer to yet, particularly as the new guy, but also because finance isn't my specialty. Everything is my specialty. I'm a jack of all trades and maybe a master of none. But that's why I have Mr. Pasquale and Mr. Arcala to support. I also want to thank Patty and Luis, our behind the scenes folks who have facilitated today's meeting. And we look forward to seeing you at one of our in-person events, hearing from you at our feedback portal, and seeing you or engaging with you at any of our upcoming board meetings. Thank you so much and have a great evening.